For some countries, a strong navy is critical for national security. Some nations have even invested an insane amount of time and money into naval projects that didn't turn out so great. Today, we'll take a look at the worst warships ever built. Number 5, the USS Massachusetts. When it comes to the worst warship in US history, you don't have to look much further than the USS Massachusetts. This 350-foot battleship was launched in 1893, and a crowd of about 15,000 people showed up to see the mighty vessel in person. Spectators were hoping to see what could have been the crown jewel of the US Navy. But instead, they were looking at a dud. So what went wrong? The Massachusetts was built during a time when the United States wanted to upgrade their naval fleet. In order to be a major power, you need the best weapons. So a major request was submitted to Congress in 1890 to build 35 warships, but the price tag was a whopping $300 million. That's roughly $6 billion in today's currency. Congress wasn't all that interested in spending so much money on a fleet. Some members didn't like the plan because the warships were seen as weapons to be used in future international issues. There were a few members of Congress who wanted the US to be an isolationist country. A compromise was eventually reached, and they decided to build 3 battleships at just $4 million each. The Massachusetts was one of the 3 ships. Also, they made a huge mistake. Instead of hiring engineers to design the ship, they asked a committee to make plans for the Massachusetts. Their basic idea was to build a ship with too many guns and way too much armor. As soon as the Massachusetts was launched, other major problems appeared. The biggest had to do with the ship's 13-foot guns. There were 4, and each weighed a whopping 136,000 pounds, and the shells they fired each weighed over 1,000 pounds. Moving those guns alone caused the ship to tilt to the side and take on water. Having an engineer design the ship would have prevented that issue entirely, but still, there were more issues. The total ammunition needed for the Massachusetts to be stocked weighed over 100,000 pounds. Also, the coal needed to run the engines weighed about 1,000,000 pounds. The ship traveled at 17 miles per hour. Also, the armor design for the ship was simply ridiculous. The armor was placed on a lower area of the ship, where it left vulnerable spots exposed to the elements. The armor basically did nothing to protect the ship and its crew. The Massachusetts did see some action during the Spanish-American War. In 1898, it was used in the bombardment of Santiago, Cuba. After the war finished, there were repairs and upgrades made to the Massachusetts, but it wasn't enough to make up for its negatives. In 1910, the Secretary of the U.S. Navy referred to the vessel as worthless and obsolete. From there, the Massachusetts was used only for training purposes. It was even used as a target for artillery practice at Florida's Pensacola Bay. Due to this, the Massachusetts sank in 26 feet of water and remains there to this day. Today, it's an underwater archaeological preserve at the Fort Pickens State Aquatic Preserve, which happens to be a favorite spot for divers who visit the state. Number 4, the Yamato. Next on our list is a Japanese World War II battleship called the Yamato. For some military historians out there, this might be a risky, controversial pick. Although this was the largest battleship in World War II, it didn't exactly make a difference in stopping the Allies in the Pacific. The Yamato was an impressive vessel for sure, but it turned out to be nothing more than a symbol of pride for the Japanese instead of a dominant battleship. At 863 feet, the Yamato was one of the biggest battleships, not just in World War II history, but in naval history as a whole. It had a crew of 2,800 to 3,000 men, and it was known as the most comfortable ship in the entire Japanese Navy. It was even outfitted with air conditioning. The ship was so massive that the Japanese lacked a shipyard big enough to hold the Yamato. It was armed with massive guns to intimidate its enemies. There were 9 main guns placed on 3 turrets. The 18-inch shells they fired could hit targets as far away as 25 miles, which was absolutely incredible. And the anti-aircraft guns on the ship were beyond nasty. When fired, a timed fuse in the shell was triggered. The shell would then explode in the airspace, filling it with flaming, burning steel and sharp shrapnel. The Yamato was also heavily armored. Those that sailed on it claimed that the ship didn't have any pitch or roll thanks to its armor. Sailors felt as they were standing on solid ground while at sea. Also, the ship could move at 27 knots or at about 31 miles per hour. While the Yamato looked the part of a major battleship, it did almost nothing when it came to naval battles in the Pacific theater. In 1942, the Yamato became the flagship for the combined fleet under the command of Japan's Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto. But on 1943's Christmas Day, the submarine USS Skate, which was patrolling the waters off Truk Atoll in the Caroline Islands, successfully fired a torpedo at the Yamato, hit it, and did damage. The ship was down but not completely out. So after repairs, the Yamato was flung into action in the Philippines under the command of a new admiral, Takeo Kurita. The Yamato was used in the Battle of Samar near the Philippines in October 1944. There it saw its first action and was responsible for sinking a ship. But torpedoes were fired at the Yamato and it had to steer away from the fighting. It did not return. The final voyage of the Yamato took place in April 1945, when it was attacked by several American aircraft. Bombs and torpedoes hit the vessel, and they inflicted a great deal of damage. Some of the damage led to the ammunition stored on the Yamato to ignite, which sealed the fate of the ship in history. What is your favorite battleship? Tell us in the comments below, and if you haven't yet, be sure to subscribe to the channel. Number 3, the Bismarck. The Bismarck was essentially Nazi Germany's pride and joy battleship. It was officially launched in 1939 and was supposed to be one of their most feared weapons. The Bismarck was heavily clad and had impressive firepower. It was the first battleship built by Germany since the First World War. It measured over 800 feet and had a crew of over 2,000 officers and enlisted men. In May 1941, the Bismarck was given a special mission to destroy ships that were bringing valuable supplies from the United States overseas to Great Britain. Operation Rheinbung was the operation's code name. The British were well aware of this mighty ship, so they sent out a search and destroy mission before the supply ships. 10 days after the Bismarck was sent out, it was met by 2 British battleships, the HMS Prince of Wales and the HMS Hood. They faced off in the Denmark Strait between Iceland and Greenland. The Bismarck was caught completely off guard by this, and a fierce battle broke out. The HMS Hood was severely damaged in the battle and eventually sank. Although the Bismarck took out one ship, they were facing a few problems of their own. The ship was quickly taking on water, and they were also leaking oil. The captain of the Bismarck decided to send the ship back to France, a country Germany had occupied at the time, to receive repairs. As the Bismarck tried to make it back to safety, British ships were informed of the position of the weakened ship. All ships were to search for and destroy the Bismarck. The British sent in multiple bomber planes as well, and the Bismarck was soon attacked. The HMS Dorsetshire delivered a knockout punch by firing 2 torpedoes. The Bismarck was hit and the ship sank, taking the lives of the 2,000 crew members. The mighty German vessel was at sea for just 10 days when it sank into the depths of the Atlantic Ocean. The wreckage of the Bismarck was rediscovered in 1989, about 400 miles off the coast of the city of Brest in France. The Bismarck's final resting place is 15,700 feet below the surface. The mighty ship lasted only a few days at sea, and it took 48 years for the wreckage to be located. Number 2, the Vasa. The Vasa was built during the 17th century and was meant to be the greatest ship in the Swedish Navy. But it turned into an infamous ship that failed to live up to its expectations. The story of the Vasa sounds unbelievable, but it's completely true. King Gustav II, Adolf of Sweden, ordered the construction of the ship around 1624. During his reign, Sweden was involved in 3 bloody wars. They were fighting Russia, Denmark, and Poland-Lithuania. King Gustav wanted Sweden to be a major world power, so he ordered 4 more ships to be built. One of them was the Vasa. It was designed to be the most powerful warship on Earth. Gustav was the king who thought outside of the box when developing the Vasa. He understood the importance of artillery. During the time period, the main naval strategy was to board an enemy ship and capture it. Gustav knew battles on the seas would soon be artillery duels, so he wanted his fleet to be armed with the biggest and the best guns out there. The Vasa's construction was in trouble in 1626 when master shipbuilder Henrik Heibertson walked away from the project thanks to an illness. He died a year later. Work eventually continued, and the ship was finally launched in 1627. In the end, the Vasa was a 226-foot ship that was supposed to be the most feared ship on the seas. It was also intricately decorated. Beautiful wooden carvings on the ship depicted stories about the Swedish royal family, especially King Gustav. The Vasa had an astounding 64 cannons, and her maiden voyage was scheduled for the 10th of August, 1628. The ship was tested before this, though, and there was trouble. An admiral was called to the ship by one of the men in charge of construction to witness the test. 30 men were supposed to run back and forth on the deck of the Vasa during the test. When they did, the ship rolled. The admiral quickly ordered the men to stop running because he feared it would sink. Despite these issues, the Vasa was still ordered to set sail on the 10th of August, 1628. It was a voyage few would forget. The maiden voyage of the Vasa was pretty short. How short exactly? The ship sailed less than a mile before tragedy hit. High winds caused the ship to tilt to the left side, and water rushed into the open gun ports. It sank, and that was all she wrote for the Vasa. So what went wrong? In the end, the project was doomed because there was more of an emphasis on firepower and design than actual seaworthiness. The 64 cannons were too much for the ship to handle, and the weight couldn't be properly supported while on the seas. King Gustav was furious about the sinking, so an inquiry was made. The surviving officers and crew were questioned, and the shipbuilders were also investigated. In the end, no one was found completely guilty, but some put the blame on the master shipbuilder Henrik Heibertson, who'd passed away. Salvaging attempts were made but failed. The Vasa was finally brought up for the world to see in 1961, and just 1 year later, the public had a chance to see it in person. The Vasa is currently on exhibit today at a Swedish museum dedicated to the famed ship. And at number 1, German U-boat 1206. U-boats, or underwater boats, were German submarines used during both World War I and World War II. During World War II, Nazi Germany built about 1,162 U-boats, and 785 of them were destroyed. One U-boat had an interesting fate, and it's one that will leave you stunned. This is the story of U-boat 1206. Towards the end of World War II, Nazi Germany launched U-boat 1206. It was a state-of-the-art ship that could sink enemy vessels and evade detection by enemies. Another key feature of the U-boat was its inclusion of toilets. Submarines at the time used a septic system for storing human waste. The designers of U-boat 1206 decided to use a high-pressure system that would eject the waste out into the ocean water. With the septic tanks removed from the U-boat, there was more space suitable for storage or equipment. On April 14, 1945, the U-boat was submerged and was on day 9 of its first mission. That's when the captain decided to use the restroom. It turned out to be a trip that doomed the whole crew. The captain quickly discovered that the high-pressure toilet system did not work properly. The captain did not know how to use the flush mechanism on the toilet, so he asked for help. The person who came to his aid accidentally turned the wrong valve, and the submarine then started to fill up with both water and human waste. This was already bad enough, and things, well, they were about to get worse. The water started leaking into the battery compartment of the submarine. This caused toxic chlorine gas to also be released. The captain had no choice but to get U-boat 1206 to the water's surface. Once they hit the surface, the captain and crew faced a new problem. A British military plane spotted them and quickly opened fire. There was no choice but to abandon ship altogether. The captain made sure the equipment on board was destroyed in case the U-boat was ever captured by the British. The U-boat sank, and in 2012, a diving crew explored the wreckage. The U-boat seemed to be in relatively good condition. Sometimes bigger is not actually better, and this was a hard lesson learned by many countries trying to develop intimidating warships. ego and ignorance are typically a dangerous mix. Do you know of any other amazing ships you'd like us to make a video about? Let us know in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.